The morning began like every other difficult morning in the quiet town of Franklin, Tennessee. But by lunchtime, an innocent single father would be lying face down on the pavement in handcuffs, while his terrified little daughter cried only a few feet away. The customers outside the hotel stared in disbelief. Employees whispered behind the glass doors. Police officers believed they were arresting an ordinary suspect. Even the wealthy hotel owner silently watched from the entrance, assuming justice was being served. But within minutes, every assumption would collapse when the officers discovered that the exhausted father they had humiliated wasn't alone. Standing only yards away was the one man nobody had recognized at first, a retired Navy SEAL whose quiet reputation carried more weight than anyone in that parking lot could imagine. Before this unforgettable story begins, if you believe kindness is stronger than judgment and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who still believes in compassion, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you powerful stories that remind us humanity still matters. Matthew Collins had never planned to become both mother and father to 6-year-old Grace. Life had rewritten his future on a cold November evening when his wife, Rebecca, lost her battle with an aggressive illness that had drained not only their savings, but also every ounce of certainty they once possessed. From that day forward, Matthew carried two responsibilities on shoulders already worn down by grief. Every sunrise meant another race against overdue bills, school lunches, daycare schedules, and exhausting shifts at the luxurious Evergreen Grand Hotel outside Nashville. The guests who walked through polished marble floors never noticed the quiet maintenance worker repairing elevators, fixing broken lights, or cleaning flooded hallways before dawn. To them, he was invisible, yet every paycheck he earned represented another week that Grace had food on the table, warm clothes, and the chance to smile despite losing her mother so young. Matthew never complained. He simply worked harder than anyone else. His co-workers often joked that he seemed capable of fixing anything. What they never understood was that every repaired faucet and every cleaned hallway was another promise kept to his daughter. Grace waited patiently every evening in the employee lounge after school, coloring pictures while her father finished overtime. The hotel management allowed it because Grace was polite, respectful, and somehow managed to brighten everyone's day with her cheerful personality, despite carrying sadness no child should ever know. One Friday afternoon, however, everything changed. The hotel hosted an exclusive business conference attended by wealthy investors and influential executives. Security had been tightened, expensive jewelry filled the ballroom, and luxury vehicles crowded the parking lot. During the event, one guest suddenly reported that a valuable diamond watch had disappeared. Panic spread quickly. Hotel managers demanded immediate action. Someone claimed they had seen Matthew walking through the restricted hallway minutes before the watch vanished. That single observation became enough for suspicion to grow like wildfire. Without asking questions or reviewing security footage, management contacted the police. Matthew had just finished replacing damaged ceiling panels when two patrol cars entered the parking lot with flashing lights. Guests stopped eating on the outdoor terrace. Employees gathered near the entrance. Grace had just walked outside carrying a drawing she wanted to show her father when she froze in fear. The officers approached confidently, believing they were handling a straightforward theft investigation. Matthew immediately cooperated, calmly explaining where he had been throughout the morning. His hands never shook. His voice remained respectful, but assumptions had already replaced facts. One officer instructed him to turn around. Before Grace could understand what was happening, metal handcuffs locked around her father's wrists. Her drawing slipped from her tiny hands and landed on the pavement. The little girl burst into tears, running toward her father until another officer gently stopped her for safety. Guests began recording videos with their phones. Some whispered that the quiet maintenance worker must have been hiding a criminal past all along. Others shook their heads with disappointment, convinced appearances had finally caught up with reality. Standing near the hotel entrance, owner Richard Bennett watched silently. Although he had only spoken to Matthew a handful of times, he found himself strangely uncomfortable watching the humble employee being treated like a dangerous criminal. Something about Matthew's calm expression didn't match the accusations surrounding him. Then an older man slowly stepped out of a black pickup truck parked across the street. His name was Thomas Walker. Few people recognized him. His gray hair and weathered baseball cap made him look like an ordinary retired grandfather visiting town. Yet Thomas carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. Years earlier, he had retired after serving with distinction as a Navy SEAL before dedicating his life to helping struggling veterans rebuild civilian lives. Thomas wasn't at the hotel by coincidence. For months, he had quietly volunteered at the community center where Grace attended an after-school reading program. He admired Matthew's determination and often saw the father arriving late every evening after exhausting workdays, always apologizing to Grace for making her wait. Thomas had witnessed enough to know what kind of man Matthew truly was. As he observed the arrest, something immediately felt wrong. Instead of raising his voice or creating a dramatic confrontation, Thomas calmly walked toward the officers and politely introduced himself. His composed demeanor caught everyone's attention. He asked a simple question that none of the investigators had considered. Had anyone reviewed the complete surveillance footage before placing a father in handcuffs in front of his child? The officers exchanged uncertain glances. The answer was no. Thomas respectfully requested that procedure be followed before destroying an innocent man's reputation. His experience in military leadership had taught him that assumptions often caused greater damage than enemy fire. His calm authority carried unexpected influence. Even the supervising officer paused long enough to reconsider the rushed investigation. Inside the hotel's security office, surveillance footage finally began playing. The recording revealed Matthew entering the restricted hallway exactly as witnesses had described. But seconds later, the truth emerged. He had entered only because a maintenance emergency had been reported involving a leaking pipe above the ballroom ceiling. After completing the repair, he immediately left carrying his toolbox. Several minutes later, another individual appeared. A conference guest wearing an expensive tailored suit casually picked up the misplaced diamond watch from a decorative table, slipped it into his jacket pocket, apparently believing it belonged to him, and walked toward another conference room. Hours later, the same guest had unknowingly placed the watch inside his briefcase, never realizing hotel security had begun searching for it. The room fell completely silent. Every accusation against Matthew collapsed in less than 3 minutes. Outside, the officers quickly removed the handcuffs. One officer looked genuinely ashamed while apologizing to Matthew. The supervising detective personally explained the misunderstanding and admitted the investigation had moved far too quickly under pressure from management. Grace sprinted into her father's arms, wrapping herself around him so tightly that Matthew nearly lost his balance. Tears streamed down both their faces as relief replaced terror. Many of the guests who had secretly recorded the arrest quietly lowered their phones, embarrassed by how quickly they had believed the worst. Richard Bennett stood frozen. He realized that his own hotel had failed one of its most loyal employees. Matthew had spent years solving problems for everyone else, yet when trouble arrived at his own doorstep, almost nobody had defended him. Almost nobody except Thomas Walker. Richard approached Matthew personally and apologized in front of every employee and guest gathered outside. He admitted that leadership required protecting good people, not sacrificing them to avoid public embarrassment. That afternoon, he announced immediate changes to hotel investigation procedures. No employee would ever again face public humiliation before evidence had been carefully reviewed. But Richard wasn't finished. After privately reviewing Matthew's employment history, he discovered years of perfect attendance, glowing performance reviews, and dozens of letters from guests praising his kindness. Maintenance workers, housekeepers, and front desk clerks all described Matthew as the first person willing to help whenever someone struggled. The following Monday, Richard promoted Matthew to Facilities Operations Manager with a significant salary increase, regular daytime hours, and full health benefits for both him and Grace. For the first time since Rebecca's passing, Matthew could finally eat dinner with his daughter every evening instead of working late-night overtime. Thomas quietly declined every offer of public recognition. He insisted he had done nothing extraordinary. He simply believed that every decent person deserved someone willing to ask one more question before rushing to judgment. Months later, Richard partnered with Thomas to launch a scholarship program supporting children of single parents employed throughout the hotel chain. Grace became the first child honored during the opening ceremony, proudly standing beside her father, while employees applauded with genuine admiration instead of whispered suspicion. The framed drawing Grace had dropped during her father's arrest was carefully repaired and now hung inside Matthew's office. It reminded everyone who entered that appearances could deceive, assumptions could destroy lives, and compassion could change them forever. Visitors often stopped to admire the simple picture drawn with crayons. To them, it looked like ordinary child's artwork. To Matthew, it represented the darkest afternoon of his life, transformed into the brightest turning point he had ever experienced. Years later, whenever new employees joined the Evergreen Grand Hotel, they heard the story of the maintenance worker who had been falsely accused and the retired Navy SEAL who quietly reminded everyone that true strength isn't measured by how quickly we judge people, but by how courageously we stand beside them when the world refuses to listen. Before we close this story, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment with the words, "Kindness always finds a way," if you believe compassion can change someone's life more powerfully than judgment ever could. If this story touched your heart, reminded you to never judge someone too quickly, or inspired you to stand up for someone who has no one else, please like this video, share it with family and friends, subscribe to the channel, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that remind the world that even in moments of injustice, hope, courage, and kindness still have the power to win. Sometimes the strongest heroes aren't the loudest voices in the crowd. Sometimes they're the quiet people who refuse to walk away when everyone else has already decided the ending. And because one retired SEAL chose compassion over silence, one innocent father kept his dignity, one little girl kept her faith in good people, and an entire community learned that the truth deserves patience before judgment.